Hi, hello, I'm Hal, welcome back to my channel, and I'm here just to talk about all the books that I ended up reading in the month of September. This does mean that this has been, I've been doing these videos for a year, which is wild to think about. I was in a very different, I wasn't in a very different place last year. I am physically in the exactly same place, but it's been a year. Things have changed, you know? So I did end up reading 8 books in the month of September. I read a few ones which are a little bit longer, so I think that kind of had an impact on it. I think I only read 3 audiobooks and one of them was a very short audiobook. In total, I read 4 physical books, 3 audiobooks and 1 ebook. And with that, 5 of those were from the library, 2 of those are books that I actually own, and one of them was through a different means, which I will explain when I get to that book. With a lot of these library books, these are actually books that I specifically asked for from the library. I went through their request a book system and they got them for me, which is why I've been able to read a lot of these new releases quite quickly, which was very cool. Shout out to my library at any at all times. So the first book that I ended up picking up this month was Ascension by S.D. Gibson. This is the sequel to Evocation. This is one of the books that I ended up picking up from the library, but because I had another loan coming in, I wasn't able to, and this was due back, and I couldn't renew it because someone else wanted this book. I don't have the copy on me, but just know, I read this physically as a hardback from a book that I requested to get from the library. So, yeah. This is a sequel to Evocation. In the first book, we're basically introduced to this cast of characters. It's an urban fantasy novel. In the first book, we're following David Aristarkov, who is a very successful medium and lawyer, who basically, at the beginning of that book, interacts and kind of gets possessed by a spirit that he's not meant to be, and he ends up having to go to his ex-boyfriend Reese and his ex-boyfriend's new wife Maura for help. And they kind of have to investigate, and maybe the familial curse is a bit more than David kind of gave credence to. All that book was about the relationship between these 3 people who do end up in a polyamorous relationship, with Reese being kind of dating both of them. David and Moira are not dating each other kind of situation. So in this book, we're following Reese. Reese, at the end of the last book, has gone into a new position of power within the occult society that they're a part of, so he's dealing with that. He is, he's basically doing his best, but instead of he just digs himself a hole, and then he continues to dig himself deeper and deeper into this hole until he's, at his worst and has to ask for help again, which does seem to be a theme in these books, but I'm not complaining. It is fun to see someone reach rock bottom and then ask for help and people support them, but they also have to, do the work to become better. I think that's a fun idea to kind of follow. But yeah, and Reese also has this fantastic combination of not being out to his parents, for being, bisexual, polyamorous, and summoning demons to his Catholic parents, who don't even call him by the correct name because he goes by a middle name, which is not, I don't think it's even his confirmation name, which I think would have been more acceptable. But he's dealing with a lot of guilt over not sharing these things rather than being these things, which I get that, deeply. I understand. So yeah, that's what Reese is basically going through. David also ends up having this little fling with a hot older mentor of him when he was a teen, when, now they're both adults, which, hot is all I'm gonna say. Anyway, so yeah, I enjoyed this book. I would say it has the same weaknesses that I had with the first book, which is it's contemporary, but in a way that's kind of cringy at some points, especially with some of the language used. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed complicated relationships and this there's a through line of these people having to work on their relationships and balance their polyamorous relationship, and everyone else in the circle in this occult society also has things going on with their relationships and their personal lives. The supporting cast of characters also slap and are really fun. I had a great time. This is another 3 stars. I love the covers for this series, which is I'm probably going to get this as a paperback as well. Had a great time with it. The next book that I ended up picking up was A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennet. This is the sequel to, what's it called? The Tainted Cup, where we once again follow our investigator character, Anna Delabra, and her assistant, Dinius Cole, as they are investigating kind of a new crime. I will say, in a very, the same spirit as Sherlock Holmes, we are a year and a half after the previous book in this series. They have obviously off-screen investigated a bunch of other, murders and crimes, which obviously puts their relationship in a bit of a different situation in this book, which I think is really fun, because it means that we can investigate some new things going on with these characters without, having to, be led there, basically. And yeah, the start of this mystery is that they were in a new city, which is just outside of the Empire, but has very strong trade relationships. And this has been this ongoing, are they going to become part of the Empire? Are they going to stay external to the Empire? They have a very strong role in, a lot of science to do with the Leviathans that live on the shore. I didn't explain this. I mean, it's a murder mystery book, but also we're set in this fantastical world. There are Leviathans that live out at sea, that come inland kind of every summer and battle themselves against these big walls that the Empire has built. There are plants that do weird and magical things. It's very cool. A lot of people are augmented in various ways. So, for example, our kind of point of view character, our assistant, Dinius Cole, he is an engraver, so he can remember literally everything that happens in a certain, when he goes into a crime scene, and things like that, which allows Anna to be on more, staying at home, weird investigator. She wears a blindfold a lot of the time, things like that. Anyway, the city that they're in, they do a lot of, they will break down Leviathan corpses and investigate how their bodies are made up and things like that. So, basically, I think it's a tax. Someone from the Empire goes, their representative, in part of these negotiation talks, and he somehow vanishes completely from his hotel room, leaving absolutely no trace behind him until they find his body in a canalway, half eaten up, mostly eaten up, to be fair, let's be correct, by a turtle in there. So Anna and Dinios have to investigate and see what's going on, and it turns out to be so much more far-ranging than that setup implies. There's a lot of complicated things. We have a very smart character that Anna is up against. This was good. This was a good... I enjoy a murder mystery. What else am I gonna say? Yeah, this was really fun. I liked as well the conversations that we're having about authoritarian leaders and things like that. I had a really good time with this. This was 4 stars as well. I am really enjoying this series so far. The next book that I picked up was Drowned Country by Emily Tesh. This is the sequel to Silver in the Woods, and this is one of the books that I actually own because I enjoyed Silver in the Woods so much. So in that book, we're following Tobias, who is kind of a green man type character. He lives in the woods of Green Hollow, unsure, and basically a new lord comes to the hall associated with these woods, and things get a little bit more complicated with the things that Tobias has going on, and also their relationship between them, and what's going on there. Why is Tobias the green man of the woods kind of thing. In this book, we do have a little bit of a time jump between the two, and Tobias and Henry Silver, the aforementioned lord in the previous book, have to investigate a new kind of thing. It starts off as possibly a young girl being abducted by a vampire, but it kind of spirals to become a little bit more than that as well. We are also focusing a lot on Henry and Tobias' relationship, because when we find them after this time skip, they're a little bit there's been some tension going on. They're a little bit cold to each other. Something has happened and we get kind of flashbacks explaining what's going on and things like that. I had a really good time with this. I do think that, I don't know if it's because I left quite a bit of time between these two books or I enjoyed the first book so much. I wasn't really, it took me a bit off guard. It wasn't what I was expecting from this book. I thought we would spend a lot more time with the vampire situation, and we absolutely did not, as an example. So, like, I didn't enjoy this as much as I enjoyed the first book, but I still had a good time. I did really very much enjoy the writing in this story as well and stuff like that. It's obviously very short, so it's not like I was complaining about having to read this or anything like that. So I've ended up rating this like as a 3 stars, but it could possibly be like a 3.5 as well. I just don't think it's quite a 4 in my rating system. The next book that I ended up finishing was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V. Schwab. I'm going to go into a rant at one point about this, but I need to point out that I did overall enjoy this book. This is like V. Schwab's take on vampires and like lesbian vampires at that, as would be expected from V. Schwab. I'm not hugely a vampire person, but like I do enjoy a V. Schwab book, so I was excited to pick this up. And we are following 3 different women through kind of starting off in 3 different time periods. We start off in like the 1530s with Maria, who is a young woman who feels very trapped by societal expectations of what a young, beautiful woman in the 1530s has to do, which is marry like a man and then stay there. And she ends up marrying someone who's quite rich, who thinks is going to take her away from the city that she's grown up with, which is the case, but then he kind of traps her in his house until she gets the freedom to kind of leave by becoming a vampire. We follow Charlotte in the 1920s, who, following kind of a situation, let's just say, at her home, gets sent to London to prepare her for her upcoming season, and she's very much non-interested with marrying a man and kind of that life which is expected for her as well. And then we follow Alice in 2019, who's at her first year of university, very much having like left home in order to kind of try and get a fresh start. And she encounters another girl, she hooks up with her, and then the morning after wakes up with like a weird transformation going on, which we obviously know is vampirism, but like she doesn't. Overall, I did really enjoy this. I love like sprawling historical epics from, you know, various points of views and things like that, and like seeing how these people and these storylines end up interacting with each other. I read this as an audiobook, which has a narrator for each separate character, which I also thought was very fun. I do think that the switches in perspective, especially in the first half, worked really well. So in the first half, we mainly have Maria and Alice, and I felt like every time I was getting like slightly bored with one of their stories, we would switch and we would have a different perspective, and that kept the pace quite well, even though it is like a slower paced kind of character focused book. When we get to the second half, which we have more of Charlotte and Alice's perspectives in that, I did feel like at certain points it did drag, and we were getting a lot of, you know, backstory from Charlotte, and then we would switch over to Alice, and it was a very short chapter, which was basically rehashing the things that happened in the last Alice chapter, and then there was another lot of Charlotte backstory. So, like, didn't work quite as well, wasn't quite as balanced as the first half of the book. But yeah, I did enjoy the way that vampires are presented in this. This is really fun idea of, like, their humanity still rotting, even though that they are, like, maintained in this process in time. I like the fact that they get weak if they're around graves as well, like around dead things and dead people. And I like that sometimes they did seem to get caught in these like loops of emotions, and like Alice, being newly turned, is feeling a lot of emotions quite strongly. And things like that, even though sometimes, again, that was a bit frustrating, and I was like, girl, we gotta get over this. I'm much chiller than any of these characters in this book, I will say. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the like conversations that were being had in this. There were some of them I was a bit like okay about, but overall I did enjoy this. I do have two nitpicks with this book. One of them is more minor and one of them is more major. So the minor one is our character Alice. She is this is set in she's in Boston, she's at Harvard University, but she grew up in a small town in Scotland. And I will say, overall, all the stuff about Scotland scanned for me as someone who grew up in England and then spent 8 years in Scotland for university and then a period of time afterwards. But I'm not, I'm not Scottish. However, at a certain point with Alice, we're getting flashbacks into her past, kind of learning more about why she's basically moved continents and countries to get away and have this fresh start. With the past at one point when she's a young teenager, I don't know, I'm picturing this about 16 or so, she ends up going to this Halloween party with her older sister, and it's mentioned that they are drinking out of red plastic cups for their drinks, which absolutely would not be the case. Red plastic cups are very much an American thing. Growing up, we just had white plastic cups, or designed plastic cups, or clear plastic cups for all of our drinks. Having specifically red plastic cups is very much an American thing, and whilst that is now a thing that we do find in our supermarkets, and again, because I'm picturing her about 16 in this story, in 2016 absolutely would not have been the case. Or if it were, we're not choosing those because they're red plastic cups, you're choosing them because they're the cheapest cup option in the supermarket. I need to put, it very much broke my immersion in this story, and it was very much a moment of V. Schwab, I know you're American because of this specific thing. The other issue that I had, which is the bit more of a major issue, is with Charlotte. So in her perspective, we start off, it's 1829, and we're given a very specific date, and it's with the 1820s. And her vibe, especially to begin with, it reads very much like Regency balls and Regency seasons, and we are colloquially still in the Regency period, but the actual Regency has finished by this point. The Regency was 1800s to 1810s, just so that we're all aware. Obviously, we're doing balls, so she is getting dressed up for these events, and she's having to wear, these fancy dresses that are picked out for her by her aunt or something like that. And she discusses, firstly, feeling she's very tightly laced. We're not using the word tight lacing, but tightly laced into her corset, and then another time that she can't breathe because of how tightly laced her corset is. Which really rubbed me the wrong way, because I don't know what you know about fashion in the 1820s, but we are obviously going from the 1810s, which is Regency. We have these empire waist dresses where the waist is very high up, it's just below the bust, to 1830s fashion, which we have these big voluminous sleeves. We do have more of an emphasis of the waist, and then we have the big skirts. There is not a clear image of what dresses we are wearing in this book, I will say. We have this mention of corsetry, but we do not have a good explanation about what dresses they're wearing, which means that I don't have a good idea what kind of corsetry they would be wearing underneath these dresses, what kind of support garments. But anyway, the thing is, if you're wearing something to support and have the shape under the 1810s garment, we don't really care about your waist. The main thing is that we're trying to get your breasts as high up as they can go, which means that in the 1810s, obviously you do have long corsets, which cover, down to your, a little bit below your waist to your hips, which probably would have had some impact on, your waist and how restricted that felt. But you also had short corsets that were very similar to what a modern bra looks like. Whereas in the 1830s dress, we do have a bit of, obviously we have a bit more emphasis in the waist, in kind of what this fashion looked like. So your corsetry is looking a little bit more like what we, often think about when we think about tightly laced corsetry, which is more Victorian. But still, we are having things like a wooden bust down the middle, and any boning that will be done in either of these, you're looking at things like cording as well, but baleen bone, which is plastic boning, is our most equivalent because it's a very lightweight material. The main upside of baleen is that it would conform to your body via heat and time. So again, these things are very molded to your shape. That's my first qualm, is like, what do you mean by 1820s and tightly laced corsets? Because one of these things would not really give you a tightly laced corset where you're interfering with breathing. Secondly, because of the time period that we're in, you as a character, as a person growing up in this time period, would be used to wearing these garments because they are your supportive garments. And so you would also be used to breathing in these garments, and even though, you know, they might be tighter laced to go into a fancy dress for a ball, you probably still are able to breathe okay in these garments because you're used to breathing in more restrictive garments. You know, I have worn restrictive garments for a period of time. I wore a binder for several years, and yeah, like, when you first start using it, it is more difficult to breathe in that, but you do get used to it. I was able to do exercise in that. You get used to it and you work out how to breathe with something that is more restrictive. It frustrates me because corsetry is very much this, like, it's very much being used as that, like, I'm not like other girls, have you ever seen me comfortable in a corset type thing, as shorthand, which I get. And it's very good shorthand because of the ideas that we have about corsetry in our, like, modern day-to-day world. But anyone who has, you know, like me, an interest in historical, like, fashion gets really frustrated when these things come up, which is why I've been, like, ranting about this for the past 5 minutes. I'm so sorry. Again, this was another thing which, like, frustrated me and took me out of the flow of the story, because I was very much like, this is not a time period where, when we talk about tight lacing, it's one that we specifically mention. Not the point. The point is, overall, I did have a good time with this book. I did feel like the ending didn't work as well for me as it maybe did with some others. It did fall a little bit flat. But overall, I would say that this is still a 4 stars. It's not a strong 4 stars compared to a book that I'm going to talk about later. It's quite a weak 4 stars, but I do think overall it does end up in that 4-star category rather than a 3-star. That's my thoughts. The next book that I ended up reading was Gifted and Talented by Olivie Blake. So, I have a complicated relationship with Olivie Blake. The first books that I read of her was the Atlas 6, and then its sequel, which I think is the Atlas Paradox, and I really dislike those books. Those books still kind of make me a little bit angry now thinking about them, and I read them like 2 years ago or something like that. I very much left that experience going, I don't think this author is for me at all. I'm never going to read another book by her again. And now I'm here, and what happened is I was watching a reading vlog where someone was talking about this book, and not only did the plot summary sound interesting, she also, like, read the, like, opening paragraph, I think, which also sounded very interesting because there is a very interesting thing going on with the narration in this book, and I was like, okay, let me try this out, and if this also doesn't work for me, then I can definitely swear off this author forever, because I think it's a bit mean to judge her based on 2 books in the same series. And it turned out that I loved this book, and is the answer to that, so I'm not giving up on Olivie Blake, apparently. The main thing that, you know, drew me to this book and I really enjoyed in this book is the narrative style, the narration. We have a third person kind of omniscient narrator, and they have such a character to them. They're kind of described as God in the beginning of this book, and we kind of get a bit more information about what's going on there, but it's so like, hey, we're introducing this character. She's an asshole, right? This is why. A lot of run-on sentences, a lot of, like, inside, like, information about these people, things like that. Really, really fun. I enjoy when someone's doing something fun with narratives, and especially with, like, a fun narration style like this one has. We're following 3 siblings who are, like, children of this, like, billionaire magitech, you know, industry tycoon kind of thing. And not only do they have their own personal problems, one of them has done massive amounts of scientific fraud. One of them is, you know, a politician with a secret polyamorous relationship where one of them might be pregnant, and also is setting off electrical things are just exploding around him, and one of them feels like she has a parasite in her chest that can cause biblical plagues. They're doing great. But also their father dies very suddenly, and suddenly the question of inheritance and who's gonna inherit the Magitech business kind of comes into play, so they're all drawn back to the house that they grew up in, or like a house that they spent a lot of time in, and things get a lot more complicated from there because of, you know, the type of people that they are. They are, you know, this is one of these books where these are bad people having complicated rich people problems, but it's so fun. This was so intensely readable, which again, I think part of that is the narrative style to this. This was such a fun time. I really enjoyed learning more about these characters, having, you know, very complicated opinions about them, but some of them are trying and some of them are not trying in very fun ways. And yeah, like, it's having some very intelligent discussions about wealth and class and colonialism, something that I did not think was present in the Atlas 6 or the Atlas Paradox, which, you know, already puts it leagues above. But what I do think is fun is that another problem that I had with the Atlas 6 about, you know, those characters also being incredibly unlikable actually is a plus in this book, which I think is really interesting, and it just shows that, like, an author can do something that you don't like in one book, but then do the same thing, but it somehow works? I don't know. Fascinating time. Had a great time with this. Yeah, I enjoy books where there's lore in the world that you get to learn as you read this. So, like, in this one, we were learning a lot about this whole, like, magic system in this world, the, like, magitech technology, that kind of stuff. I had a great time with this. In a real shock to, I think, everyone involved in this, me especially, I ended up giving this 5 stars. I just had a great time with this, and I genuinely do think that that narrative was such a strong part of that, but also just like a really fun story as well. The next book that I ended up finishing was A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This is a retelling of the Goose Girl in like T. Kingfisher style, which is to make these already, I guess, kind of dark fairy tales a little bit darker. So we're following kind of a couple of characters. Our main character, one of our main characters at least, is Cordelia, who is the daughter of a sorceress called, I think, Evelyn. And she's basically been brought up by this woman, and who is, you know, she's one of those like scheming seductress types. But part of that is that she very much controls Cordelia. You know, she's never been able to have a closed door between her and her mother. She's not able to have any secrets. Sometimes her mother physically controls her magically with like this obedience thing to make Cordelia do exactly what she wants. So what happens when the next stage in, you know, Evelyn, Cordelia's mother's plan is to ensnare and marry a rich man, and so they end up going to this guy's house, and Cordelia's like, oh no, like, he's really nice, his sister's really nice, what do I do now? And on the other side, we also have Hester's point of view. Hester is this guy's sister, older sister, you know, woman in her 40s, and she's very much like, something weird's going on. Firstly with my brother, but also with this woman's like terrified 14-year-old girl who she keeps on telling us is 17, and I do not believe her. And so yeah, they become friends, they start working together, they drag in a bunch of other fun characters to this house. And how do this bunch of very normal people who don't know that much about magic band together and try and take down this like evil sorceress, basically, is the plot of this book. We have a horse, we have geese, we have a T. Kingfisher staple, I believe, a little background romance between 2 middle-aged characters, which was very fun. Yeah, it was exactly what I expected when I picked up this book. I had a really fun time. It was just good. So yeah, I ended up giving this 3 stars. Overall, a really fun time. There is some like bits of this which are a bit gross and like gory. Great, ate that up. The next book that I ended up reading was, short story I guess, was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is the book that again, it's a short story. This is the one that I read through another means. So I ended up picking this up as a audio production done by the team behind Read Dracula, which is a podcast they've done Dracula, they've also done Camilla, they're hopefully going to do Frankenstein, where they do like an audio book slash podcast. The Read Dracula obviously was done in the same way as Dracula Daily, where they would do the section of the book on each day that it actually happens, things like that. So really interesting, cool team behind it. So they also did a production for the Yellow Wallpaper, which is what I ended up picking up. And I thought I would like rate it as an actual kind of book that I've read, because it still is technically. The short story, we're following a woman who's, her and her husband have recently moved into this house. She is confined to a room either due to a recent illness or like a more chronic condition. It's not exactly clear, but this room that she has to stay in has this yellow wallpaper with this like design that basically the woman becomes obsessed with, and she spends a lot of her time looking at it and trying to see kind of what's going on behind the wallpaper, and things get, that kind of happens, This was really good. Like, the end of this was incredibly unsettling, which, considering this is as an audiobook, was 41 minutes, is like incredible. I always feel like short stories that do a huge amount in the time that they have are like so fun and interesting and incredible. And I do think that like I'm much more likely to rate a short story kind of higher than what I would rate a novella, which is lower than what I would rate like a book, if that makes sense. Like the length here, and it goes like, I don't know, because I think that the artistry in making something a short story is like so present, especially with these things that are a lot shorter than kind of, a novella is like here and there, you just have to write a short story, but you're not doing the effort to make it actually short, and you're not putting in the effort to make it a whole novel, if that makes sense. I don't know. Anyway, I had a great time. This was incredibly unsettling at the end. I've given this 4 stars. What else can I say? I do think that this is probably a story that would benefit and will do really well with like literary analysis, but I'm not coming at it in that vein. I just came at it as something that I listened to in one day, and it was great. So, thumbs up all round. The last book that I ended up reading this month was Katabasis by R.F. Kuang, and I have the exclusive Waterstones edition that I read for this. So I think the front of this now has like some black markings from obviously the spine, because it looks really pretty. This is R.F. Kuang's new book that released recently. We are following our main character, Alice Law, who is in her last year of her PhD at Cambridge, when her PhD advisor dies very suddenly under, mysterious circumstances that Alice may or may not be involved with. And so she ends up deciding to go to hell in an attempt to get his soul back. Don't worry about it. And she initially wants to do this on her own, but Peter Murdoch, who is one of her fellow students and it has the same PhD advisor, ends up coming along with her. And they have quite a strange relationship, which is, I guess, more on Alice's side than on Peter's side, but that obviously makes things a bit more complicated, as they both not only have to navigate the various domains of hell and the various characters that they find there, but also each other and their relationship there. This was a great time. I really enjoyed this. This is very much like, as much as it is about a journey into hell and the magic system that is in this world, which is very much based on like logic puzzles and paradoxes. It's also like about academia and about like the power that an advisor has on their students and the like Oxbridge of it all kind of thing. Alice and Peter, they go to Cambridge. The first couple of like domains in hell, courts of hell that they have to navigate through are styled after a university campus kind of thing. We get some other characters that have been to Cambridge, that have interacted with the same people that we're seeing kind of in the present day, things like that. It's like about like academia in a real way. I love the magic system in this book. I, through one of the people that I watched, I saw someone do a review of like an early proof copy of this, and she didn't like the book. She felt like it was very not talky, like at a certain point there was, as I mentioned, a lot about these logic puzzles and paradoxes, and it didn't work for her. Whereas I'm a bitch who loves a book which has footnotes, which has digressions, which in general has the author teaching you something through the medium of fiction. It's why I really enjoyed Swordcross at the beginning of the year, which is an excuse to talk about like wool fabric production. It's why I really love certain fanfics where there's this trope of like bring your fanfic to work, where people talk about their incredibly niche jobs through the medium of making the characters in the fanfic do that job, and they talk about specifics that you would not know unless you actually do that job. I love learning, and I love authors putting a part of something that they're really interested in into their work. It's great. Like, that's something that I deeply enjoy and I find really fascinating. So, like, that part of it actually worked really well for me. I thought it was a great time. Yeah, we're also, like, Kuang is also back on her bullshit of having unlikable and complicated female main characters, which I thought was really fun. We're definitely not in, it's obviously a fantastical world. We have, this magic, this analytical magic that you can learn at Cambridge University kind of thing, and you can go to hell, and there are magic circles and things like that. But also, I don't think we're quite modern day. We are sort of historical. I never got a firm, grasp of when it was set, but I've also felt that was interesting because we're having some conversations around, also being women within, academia, and the complication that adds to an already kind of interesting power imbalance between a professor and their students kind of thing. If you know, you know. I really enjoyed this. I would say that I don't think this was a 5-star read for me, unfortunately, but I did really enjoy this. This is when I was referring to earlier, this is the really strong 4 stars that I read this month. Yeah, I had a great time. If I did half-star measurements, this would be a 4.5. But I don't, so it's getting a 4, but you need to understand that that's a 4 with love and affection. That is everything that I ended up reading this past month. In terms of what I'm looking forward to be reading in the month of October, I am listening to the Watermoon audiobook, and then I will be listening to the Academy for Liars audiobook as well, kind of upcoming. I'm currently reading Winter's Orbit as well, which I'm having a great time with and I'm very excited for. And I'm probably going to read To Clutch a Razor as well, which I've recently bought, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know, I might start another fantasy series. We'll see how I feel. Maybe need to reconsider my reading goal for the year and things like that. But I hope that you are also reading some good books and that you're having a nice time at the moment. Bye!